Everyone thinks this is an exorcism story. It isn't. An exorcism story has a monster, a victim, a holy man, and a final scream when the thing inside is forced out. This story is colder than that. It begins with a human being whose self has already been deleted, a body abandoned among tombs because the village has run out of ropes, chains, pity, and explanations. It ends with 2,000 animals walking into the water as if one mind has pulled one invisible wire through all of them at once. And between those two facts sits the detail almost nobody lingers on. The most terrifying voice in the story never says, "I am evil." It says, "We are many." If you're watching this late somewhere in the States, share your state and local time below. It feels wrong to enter a story about a man alone in the dark without knowing who else is awake with you. Before the shoreline, before the pigs, before the silence that would later frighten the town more than the screaming, there was a place the living had surrendered to the dead. The country of the Gerasenes sat against the eastern side of the lake, where limestone hills bent toward the water, and the air carried salt, animal musk, and the dry mineral smell of rock baked all day under the sun. The tombs were not Gothic catacombs. They were cut into the slope like wounds in the earth, small chambers where bodies had been laid away from the houses, away from cooking smoke, away from children, away from the bright noise of markets. At dusk, the stones still held heat. At night, the wind slid through the openings and dragged with it the cold breath of caves. That was where they put him. Not because they thought it would cure him, not because they hoped the dead could keep him company. They put him there because a town eventually becomes practical about terror. The first time he broke restraint, someone called it strength. The second time, they called it madness. After that, the language changed. He became a problem of distance, a danger to livestock, a danger to travelers, a danger to the people who loved him before love became too exhausted to keep standing near the thing his body had become. So they pushed him to the border, to the place where human memory goes after it stops being useful, and they kept him there, as if exile could become medicine. But the tombs did not contain him. They only gave the infection privacy. Imagine the sound first. Not a single scream. Not one dramatic howl that rises, breaks, and vanishes into the rocks. The sound was continuous. It scraped across the hills day and night, a raw human output stripped of meaning. The kind of cry that makes dogs retreat under carts and makes mothers pause in doorways with their hands still wet from washing. Sometimes it came from one place. Sometimes it ricocheted between the burial caves until direction became impossible. The people learned the rhythm of it the way sailors learn weather. A quiet hour did not mean peace. A quiet hour meant the system inside him was changing commands. The records say he was crying out and cutting himself with stones. That sounds like madness until you slow it down. A jagged rock dragged across skin has a texture the body cannot ignore. It bites, it sparks, it makes the nerves announce the border of the flesh. For a man whose inner map of himself had been shattered, pain may have been the last remaining proof that he had edges. He was not cutting because he wanted to die. He was cutting because some buried remainder of him was trying to find the line where his body ended and the world began. When the self is erased, the skin becomes a wall you have to knock on from the inside. That is the first hidden horror of this story. The man in the tombs was not empty. He was crowded. The old world had words for spirits. The modern world has other words for invasion, dissociation, neural overload, parasitic control, the collapse of bodily self-consciousness, the hijacking of the systems that let a person say, "This is me." But the terror lives underneath every vocabulary. Human identity feels permanent because it narrates itself in one voice. You wake up, and there you are. The same I that remembers yesterday. The same I that moves the hand, swallows, speaks, turns away from pain, recognizes its reflection. But identity is not a stone. It is an agreement maintained by the brain every second. Disturb that agreement hard enough, and the I can flicker. The man in the tombs did not flicker. He was overwritten. This is why the village could not understand him. They were treating a network failure like a behavioral problem. They brought chains to a war of consciousness. Iron links around wrists, shackles on ankles, men leaning their weight backward, boots grinding in dust, breath sour with fear, while his muscles surged beyond the limits a sane brain would allow. The human nervous system usually protects the body from its own force. Tendons, ligaments, joints, the little alarms buried in tissue. All of them restrain strength because survival depends on not tearing yourself apart. But if something bypasses those limiters, the body becomes an engine with the governor ripped out. He broke the chains. Not cleanly, not heroically. The iron snapped. The skin tore. The joints screamed under forces they were never built to hold. The people remembered the sound. Metal cracking has a dry, final violence to it. It does not sound like flesh. It sounds like a rule being broken. And after the restraints failed, the town learned a second rule. Do not chase him at night. Do not follow the screaming into the tombs. Do not ask what he does with the stones. Do not wonder whether the man you once knew can still hear you through the chorus. That last question was the most dangerous one, because if he could hear, then the village had not exiled a monster. It had abandoned a witness. The least told interpretation of this story is not that a demonic thing entered a man. It is that a community survived by agreeing not to imagine his interior life. They could endure his body as a threat. They could endure his voice as noise. What they could not endure was the possibility that somewhere inside the ruin, the original man remained awake, forced to watch strangers fear his face and remember his name only as something unsafe to say. Then the boat came. The lake did not announce it with thunder. Morning light spread low over the water, turning the surface the color of beaten metal. Nets dried near the shore. Pigs rooted on the slopes above, their bodies warm and rank, their hooves worrying the earth into loose brown scars. The air tasted of fish oil, wet rope, dung, and the faint bitterness of dust. From the tombs, the man saw the boat before the village did. Or something inside him saw it, and that difference matters. The figure stepping onto the shore was not carrying weapons. He was not surrounded by soldiers. He was not performing fear. He arrived with the terrible stillness of someone who did not need to raise his voice to be obeyed. The story names him as Jesus of Nazareth, but the deeper structure of the scene is not a contest between a healer and a ghost. It is a collision between two kinds of order. On one side, a swarm, multiplied, frantic, decentralized, using one body as hardware. On the other, a singular organizing principle so absolute that corruption recognizes it before any human being does. That is why the man runs toward him, not away. Toward. There is a violence in that approach, but not the violence the village expected. Picture his body descending from the tombs, feet striking stone, scars flashing pale against sunburned skin, hair matted with sweat and dust, the smell of old blood and cave damp coming before him. Every movement carries a contradiction. Too fast, but not free. Coordinated, but not human, as if 1,000 impulses are fighting over one skeleton and somehow reaching temporary agreement. His shoulders twitch in tiny opposing commands. His eyes cannot settle on one point. They scan, snap, widen, empty, as though no single watcher lives behind them. And then, within range of the man from Nazareth, the whole machine arrests. This is the moment most retellings rush past, but it is the key to everything. No battle, no exchange of blows, no test of strength. A body that could not be chained collapses to the ground. A network that had used a man like a fortress suddenly discovers it has been standing on exposed wire. The swarm recognizes jurisdiction. It does not negotiate from power. It pleads from terror. The question comes with almost unbearable simplicity. What is your name, Not? What are you, Not? Why are you here, Not? How many graves have heard you scream? The question is aimed at the center, at the human operating system that should still be able to answer. What is your name in any normal encounter? A name gathers a person back into one point. A name means history. Mother, work, village, face, the child you were, the hand that fed you, the bed you left, the one who waited. A name is not just a label. It is the smallest container that can hold a self. But the answer that comes back is a fracture. My name is Legion, for we are many. Listen to the grammar. It begins as one, my name. Then the sentence opens, and the many pour through. We are many. The singular does not become plural gently. It is crushed mid-breath. This is not a monster introducing itself with style. It is a damaged system reporting its architecture. A legion in the Roman world was not a mob. It was thousands of bodies disciplined into a single war machine, distributed but unified. Many feet, one command, many hands, one purpose. The entity chooses a military word because it is describing the shape of itself. It is not one invader. It is a hostile civilization inside a man. The author's verdict is this. The true antagonist of the story is not possession. It is multiplication without a soul. The moment intelligence becomes networked enough to survive while the person carrying it disappears. That verdict changes the tombs. They were not just a haunted place. They were a server room made of bone, chambers, and heat. The man was not merely suffering. He was processing. His vocal cords became output. His muscles became actuators. His wounds became emergency calibration. The tombs became the outer shell of an internal system too crowded for one skull. And the terrible part is that the network had adapted. It had routines. It had a territory. It had learned the hills, the chains, the villagers' fear, the edge of the lake. It had become local. That is why it begged not to be sent away from the region. The request sounds strange until you understand parasites. A parasite does not need to love a place to depend on it. It needs conditions, anchor points, hosts, repetition, a stable route through matter. The swarm feared the abyss because the abyss was not simply punishment. It was delocalization. No flesh, no nerve, no mouth, no blood heat, no region to infect. The abyss was not a prison with walls. It was the loss of structure itself, a fall into unmaking. For a hive mind that survives by occupying systems, The true horror is not pain. It is disconnection. So the swarm bargains for biology. Nearby, on the slope, the pigs feed and shift. 2,000 bodies, 2,000 nervous systems. 2,000 wet snouts pushing through dirt. 2,000 hearts beating under bristled hides. 2,000 small animal lives not yet aware that a cosmic negotiation has made them available. Their smell lies thick in the warming air. Sour. Living. Ordinary. That ordinariness matters. The story turns on a herd because horror becomes more convincing when it enters something plain. Not a dragon, not a temple. Animals eating on a hillside. The request is granted, and for one breath, nothing happens. This pause is where dread belongs. The man is on the ground. The shoreline is still. The disciples are watching with the particular nausea of men who have crossed water expecting one danger and found a different law waiting on land. The villagers are not yet close enough to understand. The pigs lift their heads. The lake keeps touching the shore with soft, repetitive sounds. Water on stone. Water on mud. Water on reeds. Then the network moves. The expulsion is not a theatrical cloud. It is not smoke pouring from a mouth. It is more intimate than that. The man's body releases a burden it had mistaken for reality. His muscles, clenched for years around commands not his own, lose their terrible voltage. His jaw slackens. His fingers uncurl from dirt. The air around him feels suddenly less crowded, as if a room full of people has stopped speaking at once. And above him, on the hillside, 2,000 animals receive the command. They do not panic. That is the second hidden horror. Panic is individual. Panic swerves. Panic collides with itself. Panic squeals, hesitates, doubles back, tramples, breaks apart. What happens on that slope is not panic. It is synchronization. The herd aligns. 1,000 small decisions vanish. Every body turns according to the same unseen geometry. Hooves strike the earth in a rhythm too precise for instinct. Dust lifts in a single sheet. The ground shudders, not with chaos, but with order stolen from the wrong source. The sound would have entered the chest before the mind understood it. 8,000 hooves pounding as one. Not a stampede, a sentence written in impact. The pigs surge down the steep bank toward the water, and for the first time, the village sees the architecture that had been hidden inside the man. They see what Legion looks like when it is spread across enough bodies to become visible. It is not horns. It is coordination. The lake receives them without understanding, one after another, and all at once. The animals enter the water. Their bodies break the surface, bristles flattening, mud washing from legs, nostrils dipping, lungs resisting what the command insists upon. The old instinct should have erupted there. Life fights drowning. Life claws upward. Life thrashes against suffocation. But the record says they were drowned, choked, swallowed by the sea. And the most awful way to imagine it is not as a frantic accident, but as obedience. They continue forward. They inhale water as if breathing has been redefined. The surface churns, then darkens, then closes over the last moving backs. 2,000 animals vanish, and the man remains. This is where most versions of the story exhale. The victim is free. The evil is gone. The miracle is complete. But real horror does not end when the invader leaves. Sometimes that is when the survivor first has to meet the damage. He sits on the shore clothed and in his right mind. That phrase is usually read as comfort, but it should make the room go quiet. In his right mind means alone in his own skull for the first time in years. No chorus, no constant interior pressure, no foreign commands dragging his limbs, no overlapping voices speaking through his mouth. Only one breath, one heartbeat, one self. Returned to a house whose rooms have been smashed open, the silence must have been unbearable. You can hear silence after noise if the noise has been loud enough. It does not feel empty, it presses. The ears search for what is missing. The body braces for a command that does not come. His fingers tremble because they are finally his, and that ownership is unfamiliar. His eyes lower to the scars on his arms, the raised tracks and new cuts. The map of every desperate attempt to prove he had borders. The stones are still there. The tombs are still there. The lake still smells of animals and churned mud and death. But inside him, the multitude is gone. The absence is so complete it has weight. When the townspeople arrive, they do not celebrate. They are afraid. This reaction is one of the most honest details in the account. People say they want restoration, until restoration proves that the world is larger and more dangerous than the system they use to manage it. The madman in the tombs was terrifying, but he was known. He occupied a category. He could be avoided. He explained the screams on the hill. But a man who can unmake that terror without violence, who can reverse a condition everyone had surrendered to, who can command the network to leave and send a visible demonstration of its scale into the sea, that man does not fit inside the village's categories. The cured man scares them because he is evidence. The drowned herd scares them because it is cost. Jesus scares them because he reveals that their survival strategy was not truth. It was containment. So they beg him to leave. Notice the symmetry. The swarm begged not to be sent out of the region. The people beg the Logos to leave the region. Different mouths, same instinct. Keep disruption away. Keep the world manageable. Keep the tombs in their place and the houses in theirs. Keep the horror exiled where it can be heard but not answered. This is the part of the story that feels ancient and modern at the same time. We are still capable of preferring a familiar catastrophe to an unfamiliar cure. We are still tempted to ask deliverance to depart when it threatens the arrangements we built around damage. The survivor wants to go with him. Of course he does. What else is left? The tombs hold the shape of his captivity. The town holds the memory of his exile. The hills hold the echo of his own voice when it was no longer his. Every road is contaminated by recognition. Every face will see him twice, once as the man returned, once as the thing that used to scream. To leave with the one who restored him would be more than gratitude. It would be escape from being the evidence everyone wants hidden. But he is not allowed to go. Instead, he is sent back. This is not a soft ending. It is almost cruel in its precision. The man who was erased must now become a witness to his own restoration among the very people who survived by placing him outside the village imagination. He has to walk back through streets that know his footsteps as threat. He has to enter rooms where conversation stops. He has to live with a self returned, but returned in public, under the eyes of people who remember the chains. He has to tell what happened, not as doctrine, not as performance, but as the only one who knows from the inside what it means for the I to be lost and given back. And still, that is not the deepest irony. The deepest irony is that the monster told the truth. My name is Legion, for we are many. The thing that erased the man also revealed the condition the village refused to see, that a human being can become a battlefield for forces too numerous to name, and that a community can become organized around not rescuing him. The miracle did not simply remove evil from one body, it exposed the entire region. It showed the villagers their fear, their economy, their boundaries, their bargain with the tombs. The man had been possessed by a hive-mind. The town had been possessed by containment. And that is why this story has not aged. Today, we do not usually describe our invasions in the language of spirits. We describe them as systems, feeds, algorithms, markets, crowds, institutions, workflows, metrics, networks so large that no one person feels responsible for what they do, yet everyone inside them learns to move with the herd. The modern terror is not always that something monstrous will enter you and make you scream in a graveyard. Sometimes the terror is quieter. It is the moment you realize your voice has become output for a system you did not build. Your attention has been harvested by a swarm you cannot see. And your private self is being overwritten in fragments so small, you keep calling them choices. So the hidden question is not, could this happen? The hidden question is, how would you know before the eye was already gone? The man in the tombs had one mercy. His captivity became visible. Chains broke. Stones cut skin. Voices spilled into the night. The village could pretend not to understand him, but it could not pretend nothing was happening. Modern possession is more polite. It rarely throws us naked among graves. It teaches us to perform ourselves until performance becomes identity. It gives us thousands of voices in the skull and asks us to call them community. It multiplies desire, outrage, fear, appetite, memory, until one person begins to contain a crowd and wonders why silence feels like withdrawal. The Gerasene survivor sits there in the aftermath of the drowned herd, and he becomes a mirror we are not ready to face. Not because he was uniquely broken, but because his condition was an extreme version of a fragile truth. The self is not guaranteed. It has to be guarded. It has to be gathered. It has to resist becoming infrastructure for something that does not love it. The shoreline has gone quiet now. The lake, which swallowed the herd, resumes its small sounds as if nothing impossible has happened. The bodies drift below the surface, heavy and slack. The herdsmen run toward the town, carrying news that will sound insane until the people climb the slope and smell the truth for themselves. Wet animal hair, mud, blood from the man's reopened cuts. The sour human fear of witnesses who have just learned that reality contains more authority than they can negotiate with. Jesus steps toward the boat. The survivor remains on land. And somewhere in the space between them, the story refuses to give us the ending we want. It does not promise that the man's memories will fade. It does not promise that the village will welcome him. It does not promise that the silence in his head will feel like peace. It only gives him a task. Go home. Tell what was done for you. Become the living contradiction to the tombs. That may be the hardest command in the entire story, because the true aftermath of Legion is not the dead herd. It is the life after the voices stop. At first, people would have watched him from a distance, not openly. Humans are rarely that honest. They would have watched through doorways, over market stalls, from behind clay jars, while pretending to adjust a strap or sweep dust from a threshold. Children would have been pulled closer when he passed. Dogs that once barked at him might have gone silent, confused by the absence of the old smell of frantic sweat and blood. He would have worn borrowed clothing that sat strangely against skin accustomed to weather and stone. Fabric can feel like a hand when you have lived too long without softness. The weave would rub against scars, the seams would catch on healing cuts. Every ordinary sensation would become an announcement from a body he had to relearn. This is the part no stained glass window can hold. Restoration has a texture. Bread tastes different when your mouth is yours again. Water feels almost violent the first time it goes down a throat no longer forced to scream. Sleep is not immediate. Sleep may be frightening. For years, darkness meant crowding, pressure, the swarm turning inward. Now, darkness contains only the survivor's own thoughts, and that loneliness can be its own abyss. He may have jolted awake to the sound of his own breathing. He may have waited for the old voices to fill in the blank spaces. He may have feared their return so intensely that every headache became a prophecy. There is a kind of freedom that first arrives as shock, and the village, for all its fear, would have needed him. That is another uncomfortable truth. The same people who asked the healer to leave would eventually require the survivor's explanation, because the drowned herd had changed the economy of the region. 2,000 animals did not vanish as a metaphor. They were property, food, labor, wealth, future trade, family accounts, winter security. The owners would have counted loss with clenched jaws. They would have wanted somebody to blame. And the man who had once been blamed for everything was now the only human proof that something greater than blame had occurred. Think of him standing before men who used to chain him, trying to describe what it was like when the many spoke through one throat. No dramatic sermon, no polished testimony, just a scarred man searching for words that would not betray the experience by making it smaller. He would say there were voices, and they would imagine noise. He would say there was pressure, and they would imagine pain. He would say he was still there, somewhere underneath, and this is where the room would become unbearable. Because if he was still there, then every chain had touched a person. Every exile had been witnessed. Every act of containment had entered his memory. The miracle did not erase accountability. It made accountability possible. The people had reasons. Of course. Every community does. He was dangerous. He broke restraints. He lived among the dead. He could not be housed, soothed, trusted, understood. People had children to protect, animals to tend, roads to keep usable. No serious reading of the story should pretend the village was simply cruel. Fear can be rational and still become sin when it begins to enjoy the convenience of distance. That is the knife edge. Survival can require boundaries, but sometimes a boundary becomes a tomb with a living person inside. The survivor's presence forces that question every morning. Maybe this is why he is sent back rather than allowed to leave. Not as punishment, but as interruption. A man restored from the tombs becomes a breach in the village's story about itself. He proves that the person they had reduced to danger was never only danger. He proves that the problem they managed was also a soul, and because he stays, no one can pretend the screams were only background noise. His sanity becomes testimony against their relief. Do not mistake this for a simple moral lesson. The story is stranger than that. The man is not merely victim. The town is not merely coward. And Jesus is not merely compassionate. The entire event operates like a system being forced to reveal its hidden architecture. The hive-mind reveals itself through grammar. The village reveals itself through fear. The logos reveals itself by doing almost nothing visible. Quiet command, total collapse, Permission granted. Mass extinction. A restored man sitting still, and an entire region trembling. That stillness matters. When the townspeople find him sitting, clothed, and in his right mind, they are witnessing something more destabilizing than violence. Violence confirms expectations. Order after chaos threatens them. A screaming man among tombs can be explained as curse, madness, danger, bad blood, divine punishment, anything that keeps him separate from normal life. But the same man sitting peacefully near the one who healed him destroys the category. It says the distance between the village and the tombs was never as absolute as they needed it to be. It says the thing that happened to him could be reversed. It says the world has an authority deeper than the arrangements people make with despair. And people are often more frightened by hope than horror. Hope demands revision. Horror only demands avoidance. This is why the request for Jesus to leave is not an irrational response. It is the most human response in the story. They have just seen an unbearable hierarchy of power. The unchainable man was beneath Legion. Legion was beneath the Logos. Their economy was beneath a command. Their shoreline was beneath a truth that did not ask permission. And when human beings encounter an authority that cannot be absorbed into their normal systems, they often choose absence. Please leave. Not because nothing happened, but because too much did. The boat becomes a mercy to them. If he leaves, perhaps the region can stabilize. Perhaps the story can be told in a way that keeps its implications contained. Perhaps the drowned pigs can become a financial grievance rather than a metaphysical autopsy. Perhaps the man can be watched, categorized again, turned into a strange local legend. Perhaps the tombs can go quiet without the village having to remember that it had made peace with hearing them scream. But stories like this do not stay contained. The survivor carries it. He goes through the Decapolis, through the 10-city world of mixed cultures, Roman roads, Greek speech, local gods, imperial pressure, trade dust, and rumor. Imagine the way the account travels before it becomes scripture, not as a polished doctrine, but as a man telling and retelling the impossible until certain details sharpen and others fall away. The tombs, the chains, the name, the herd, the water, the silence. Each telling would cost him something. Trauma is not emptied by speech. Sometimes speech reopens the chamber. But testimony also reclaims ownership. The swarm used his mouth. Now he uses it. That reversal is one of the quiet triumphs of the story. The same body that once broadcast the Hive-Mind becomes the carrier of a singular memory. One man, one voice. Speaking of the many were forced to leave. The structure is almost too perfect. Legion had said, "We are many," and used that many to erase one. The survivor says, "This happened to me," and uses the one to expose the many. He becomes the Anti-Hive. Not because he has power over crowds, but because he refuses to let a crowd own his experience. There is a modern wound here, and it cuts close. Many people know what it is to have their inner life colonized by voices that are not literally supernatural, but are no less invasive. Family scripts, public shame, digital outrage, professional identities, ideological tribes, the endless advisory committee of imagined observers living in the skull. We call it pressure, anxiety, overthinking, burnout, noise. But sometimes the old language understands something the new language makes too clean. Sometimes a person does not feel stressed. Sometimes a person feels occupied. And sometimes healing does not feel like happiness. Sometimes healing feels like being returned to a room after the crowd has left, discovering the furniture overturned, the windows broken, the air stale, and realizing this ruined place is yours. You may be grateful. You may be alive. You may even be sane. But you still have to live in the room. That is where the Gerasene survivor becomes more than a rescued figure. He becomes a witness to the cost of getting the self back. Now return to the hillside one last time and look at the herd, because it tells us what Legion was trying to hide. Inside one man, the network could disguise its scale as madness. Spread across 2,000 animals, it became visible as physics. This is the logic of every hidden system. Keep it inside one victim, and the victim looks broken. Force it into the open, and everyone can see the pattern. The pigs did not create the evil. They revealed its coordination. They made the invisible architecture measurable in dust, sound, and drowning bodies. That is why the event is so disturbing. It is not simply that animals died. It is that the death displayed what had been living inside the man. The herd became a diagram, and the diagram says this. The hive-mind does not need understanding. It needs vectors. It needs bodies capable of receiving command. It does not care whether the host is human or animal, whether the flesh carries memory or only instinct. It seeks embodiment because disembodied disorder cannot act in the world. It needs mouths, muscles, hooves, hands. It needs the material world while despising the selves inside it. The Logos does the opposite. He restores the person, then sends him back into the material world with speech, memory, clothing, and responsibility. He does not dissolve the man into mystical light. He returns him to neighbors, roads, meals, the unbearable ordinary. Salvation in this story is not escape from embodiment. It is the recovery of rightful embodiment. A body no longer used as machinery for the many, a voice no longer stolen, a name, even if the text never preserves it for us, returned to the one who can answer. The fact that the text never gives his name is its own wound. We know the name of the invader. We do not know the name of the survivor. That asymmetry should bother us. It mirrors the way trauma often works in public memory. The catastrophe gets named. The monster becomes famous. The diagnosis becomes shorthand. The person becomes the demoniac, the victim, the case, the one from the tombs. The story restores his mind but withholds his name, leaving us to feel the loss. Perhaps that is deliberate. Perhaps every listener is meant to experience the discomfort of having used his condition as his identity. So do not call him by the thing that happened to him. Call him the survivor. And when the survivor speaks, the world around him has to decide whether it wants a person or a legend. A person complicates memory. A legend can be safely repeated. A person can forgive, accuse, forget, relapse into nightmares, laugh unexpectedly, flinch at chains, avoid shorelines, weep without warning at the sight of pigs driven to market. A legend cannot embarrass us with ongoing needs. It is easier to honor a miracle than to live with the healed. The story refuses that ease. It leaves him there, not in the boat, not among the disciples, not removed from the scene as proof of a completed miracle. He remains in the region where the network once held territory, and his continued existence becomes a form of occupation in reverse. Every day he stays himself. Legion loses ground. Every ordinary act becomes defiance. Eating, sleeping, speaking, wearing clothing, sitting in a doorway without being feared, hearing only his own thoughts and not mistaking the silence for death. But the silence remains complicated. There is a reason the ending should not be played as simple triumph. The man has gained freedom, but he has also gained memory without anesthesia. The swarm is gone, and with it, the strange, horrific company of the many. People who survive extreme psychological states sometimes describe the aftermath not only as relief but as vacancy, even grief. The mind adapts to what occupies it. Remove the occupation suddenly, and the absence can echo. The survivor may have hated the voices and still staggered under the size of their disappearance. That is not contradiction. That is neuroplasticity with scars. A brain reshaped by constant invasion does not instantly become untouched. It has grooves. It has expectations. It has alarm pathways worn deep by years of command and resistance. The body remembers postures long after the threat is gone. Shoulders brace, hands clench. Sleep avoids depth. A sudden shout can bring the tombs back into the room. A stone underfoot can become a memory of skin. The smell of wet animals can open the entire shoreline again. Restoration is not amnesia. It is the beginning of integration. In a lesser story, the healed man would smile, the people would cheer, and the camera would rise toward a clean sky. But this story knows better. It gives us fear, economic loss, a request for departure, a denied plea to follow, and a commission to return. The ending is messy because real deliverance enters systems, and systems resist being exposed. The man is free, but the region has been unsettled. That is not a flaw in the miracle. That is the miracle doing full damage to the lie. The lie was that the problem lived only in the tombs. The truth is that the tombs were connected to everything. They were connected to the village's fear, to the owner's wealth, to the roads people avoided, to the theology people used to explain what they could not help, to the silent decision that some suffering can be exiled and still counted as managed. When Jesus arrives, he does not simply enter a private crisis. He enters a whole arrangement, and by restoring one man, he forces the arrangement to confess itself. That is the great reversal. The possessed man was not the only one inhabited. The village was inhabited by dread. The herd was inhabited by legion. The disciples were inhabited by bewilderment. The region was inhabited by a bargain with the unbearable. Only the Logos stands uninhabited, not because he is empty, but because he is singular. In a story obsessed with multiplicity, his singularity is the weapon. He does not become louder than legion. He becomes simpler, more ordered, more final. This is why the confrontation takes so few words. True authority does not need theatrical excess. It names, it commands, it permits, it sends. The swarm uses many voices because it has no center. The Logos uses few words because he is center. And that contrast is the spine of the entire documentary. Many versus one, noise versus word, occupation versus embodiment, containment versus restoration, a village that survives by exile versus a witness and home. The horror is not merely that a man was invaded. The horror is that invasion can become normal if everyone around it adapts. So ask the question slowly. Which is more frightening? The swarm that says, "We are many," or the town that learns to sleep while one of its own screams among the dead? There is no clean answer. The swarm destroyed the self from inside. The town preserved itself from outside. One is supernatural horror, the other is social anatomy. Together they form the complete terror of the story. Because a person can be lost not only by what enters them, but by who decides their loss is survivable, and yet, the survivor's final act is not revenge. He tells, "That may sound small until you remember that the first thing Legion took from him was reliable speech." The Hive-Mind turned language into evidence of fracture. "My name is Legion, for we are many." After the restoration, speech becomes repair. Each time he tells what happened, he gathers the fragments into sequence. Before, there was screaming, then encounter, then release, then silence, then return. Narrative is not decorative here. It is neurological. It is how a self reclaims time from trauma. A person who can tell the story of what happened has not necessarily healed, but they have stopped being only the place where it happened. That distinction matters. The survivor is not the tombs. He is not Legion. He is not the herd. He is not the village's fear. He is the one who lived through the collapse of the eye and came back with a voice. Not untouched, not simple, not safe for easy sermons, but present. And presence is the thing the swarm could never manufacture. It could coordinate. It could imitate speech. It could weaponize strength. It could occupy memory, fracture grammar, hijack muscle, and drive animals into water. But it could not produce a self. Multiplication is not personhood. A crowd inside a skull is still not a soul. That is the boundary the story draws with terrifying clarity. Many can overpower one, but many cannot replace the meaning of one. This is why the final image should not be the pigs drowning, even though that is the spectacle. It should not be the villagers recoiling, even though that is the indictment. It should not even be Jesus leaving, though that is the mystery. The final image should be the survivor at the edge of ordinary life, hearing nothing but his own breath, holding the weight of a restored self, and realizing freedom has placed him back among people who may never know how to love him without fear. The deepest irony is that the punishment Legion feared, disembodiment, is the very mercy the survivor needed. The swarm called it annihilation because without a host it had no shape. But for the man, the loss of the many was the return of the one. That flips the story. The drowned herd is not the climax of destruction. It is the moment the hidden architecture of captivity becomes visible enough for the restored man to finally be believed. And that is the contemporary mirror. Most of us will never live among tombs, break chains, or hear a legion speak through our mouths. But many of us know the moment when our inner life stops sounding like one person. We know what it is to carry the voices of work, family, feeds, audiences, enemies, expectations, all talking at once until silence feels dangerous. We know what it is to be useful to a system that does not know our name. So here is the question the story leaves open, and it is not comfortable. If restoring one human being meant exposing the thing your whole community had learned to manage, would you stand with the survivor on the shore? Or with the villagers who begged the healer to leave so life could become predictable again? Because the next question is worse. If Legion needed bodies to act in the world, and the Logos needed only a word to unmake it, then what exactly was the abyss that terrified the swarm so badly? A place, a state, a prison, or the one region of reality where no stolen voice can survive? Once you notice that, the story does not end at the lake. It opens downward,